Good evening. Today in Russia is a special day, a holiday which is never marked in red on calendars, a day which becomes a national holiday not only on days of anniversaries or celebrations, but yet a holiday for all Russians, for everyone who understands the significance of the Russian language and the grandeur of national culture. Today is the birthday of Pushkin. Pushkin, as his contemporaries wrote, is truly everything for us. For almost 2 centuries, he remains the central figure in Russian culture, and still we hold him as a standard in purity of expression and nobility of thought. Among the first who this morning brought flowers to the Pushkin monument was the president. And later the festivities expanded and spread broader. His traditional Moscow address is on the square, but by midday at the monument, poems were recited and lyrical songs sung, not just the favorite Pushkin ones, but also contemporary ones, which he might have liked. Because it only seems to us that he is a poet of remote history. He's truly quite close by, if in our midst there is his great-grandson, Grigory Grigorievich. Alexander Sergeyevich was born in Moscow, but the native city of the poet Pushkin is Petersburg, and there today events are held to mark the date. In the Volkonsky house on 12 Moika Street, which Alexander Sergeyevich leased for 2 years but lived in only for 4 months, Pushkin didn't manage to celebrate a single birthday. Today the last apartment of the poet was opened after repair and restoration. And Pushkin again returned back here. Who among us didn't try to understand and rekindle in our imaginations, at least for an instant, that life which passed by within these walls? As in each family, the poet lived through bitter and joyous moments here. At this table, Pushkin worked. In his free moments, he'd sign the invoices for the hats of Natalia Nikolaevna. The last invoice for the purchase of a cloudberry is dated the day of the poet's death. The builders and restorationists breathed life into these walls. The apartment ceased to be a memorial, and it seems that you hear the master's steps and his voice, the scratching of his plume. It seems to us that the spirit of Pushkin has settled here. Pushkin belongs not just to history, but to our present lives. Today's holiday is a step to the approaching bicentennial of the poet, and already chronicles of his life are being prepared, his works, an academic edition of his works, and the first volumes of work notebooks have been published, a Russian-British project. There is fewer and fewer talk about how difficult it is to accomplish what is necessary. There are very many different organizations, even completely commercial organizations, social movements, which suddenly begin to pour their souls into this. And I sometimes think that by the bicentennial, the spiritual unity of Russia will be restored. I believe in this deeply, and we work toward this. Pushkin will help. Yes, Pushkin will help, and God as well. In Neftegorsk, rescue work continues, yet hopes of saving someone still linger. But in the last 24 hours, among those exhumed from under the rubble, there were no survivors. Our correspondent reports from Neftegorsk. By the end of the 6th of June, half of the destroyed buildings cleared of debris to their foundations. Representatives of the Ministry of Emergency Situation working in the earthquake reported to the temporary administration of Neftegorsk. On these sites, there's nothing further to seek. The freed-up equipment has been moved to the remaining uncleared 8 rubble sites. No one in the disaster zone, although 10 days have passed, has finally lost hope to save at least one more survivor. The hour of silence was not recalled when all technology shuts down, and the rescuers shout to survivors to call back. During the last day, exhumed from under the rubble were 60 bodies. The latest reports will be available by day's end. The sorrowful list is growing, and even if someone is saved, nonetheless, the blind, merciless disaster has killed more than 2,000 of our compatriots in Neftegorsk. The Organization of Emergency Rescue Efforts has earned the kindest words from representatives of the International Red Cross who had visited the disaster zone. Of course, there are problems which are unavoidable. For example, there's nowhere to store the rubble from buildings. It's dumped indiscriminately, obviously not to the benefit of the environment, which is already strained by the catastrophe. Trenches must be dug for debris, but there's a shortage of heavy digging equipment. And yet, even with the acute issues arising, clearing of rubble will last no longer than 5 days. The immediate task after this is to pay compensation of all types. And the second matter, which has to be resolved with the Neftegor residents, is the construction of housing for them. And this is probably a more long-term objective, but no later than by September of this year. Before winter, we are attempting to build around 700 apartments for the families of Neftegor. Half of those families consists of only one person. The incessant underground tremors in the Far East make it the priority objective to ensure the seismic endurance of all structures in all cities and villages of the region. In the category of particularly volatile seismic regions is Kamchatka. What is being done there to avert and diminish repercussions of a disaster if, God forbids, it occurs, our correspondent tells us. If an earthquake of a force of 9 or 10 points occurs in Kamchatka, in Petropavlovsk, not 17 such buildings as in Neftegorsk may collapse, but significantly more. But the efforts to seismologically fortify the residential buildings, industrial, public and other buildings has lately increased significantly. Conducted 2 times this year alone were large-scale command staff exercises of the Ministry of Emergency Situation Brigades indicated the clear and noticeable improvement in the readiness of the district to deal with the consequences of a major earthquake. This was also confirmed by the immediate flights from Petropavlovsk of planes carrying rescuers, equipment and medications to Neftegorsk to the aid of the Sakhalin neighbors. Apart from that, near Petropavlovsk is stationed a well-equipped and trained mobile special battalion of civilian defense in areas of the volatile seismic regions of the peninsula. A broad network of seismic monitoring is operating, set up and already functioning is the Monitoring Center for Seismic and Volcanic Activity. Boris Yeltsin continues to keep close control over the situation around the earthquake on the island of Sakhalin. He received in the Kremlin today the Ministry of Emergency Situations, Sergei Shoigu. The president supported the minister's proposal to increase by 3 times the forces of the Rescue Corps in the Ministry of Emergency Situations. At today's press conference, Sergei Shoigu attempted to summarize the first results of the actions of the Ministry of Emergency Situations on Sakhalin. First of all, this was probably the first case when, truly in full measure, the entire Russian system was deployed of actions in an emergency situations. All branches of the Russian system reacted instantaneously and knowledgeably and in a timely fashion and confidently. 1,700 rescuers from the Ministry of Emergency Situations, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Internal Affairs pulled out 1,786 people, 486 alive. For the restorational work in Neftegorsk and compensation to victims, 91 billion rubles must be dispersed. Currently, they're speaking of so-called housing certificates, which will guarantee the victims 18 square meters of housing per person in any region of Russia. The environmental situation in the area of the disaster is normal. There were oil leaks, but they were insignificant. Many were surprised why Russia rejected foreign aid, but it turns out that that's not quite so. Foreign aid is being accepted, and there were no barriers nor rejections of any kind. The first cargo of humanitarian aid came from Japan, Korea, and Belgium. Russia turned down only services of foreign rescuers they managed themselves. Now, when even many streets of Moscow look like disaster areas, the problem of providing rescue work is especially current. There is no problem with rescuers themselves. Specialists on the Ministry of Emergency Situations are proficient in 12 to 14 professions. They're scuba divers, crane operators, and God knows what. In Switzerland, there are only 7 such persons. In our country, significantly more, but it doesn't at all reflect on their salary. Vedeno, this is the name of the populated point in the south of Chechnya, which lately became an object of special concern. Dudaev sources assert that this village is under their control, but the commander of the federal forces, the Colonel General Anatoly Kulikov, says that Vedeno is controlled by federal forces. Today, General Kulikov said that in the village, employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia and Chechen militia are employed, who discovered a major ammunition stockpile belonging to the Dudaev fighters. The information of the Russian command is confirmed by our personal correspondents. The regional center, Vedeno, here was the headquarters of the armed groups of Aslan Maskhadov. For 3 days, people have been living in peace and rejoice because they hear no shots or explosions. Currently, The armed groups have occupied defense positions in these mountain ridges covered with thick forest. Aviation and the artillery of the federal forces is dealing blows to the concentrations of gunmen. Here, in the Vidino Secondary School number 2, there was not just a headquarters commanding the armed groups, but a veritable center for training gunmen. The combat textbooks left behind in a rush and plans are evidence that the military science was studied here quite thoroughly. From here, from Vidino, through the aid of powerful television transmitting devices, broadcasts were aired with appeals of General Dudayev not to lay down weapons and fight to the last drop of blood. And yet the weapons were abandoned by the Dudayev subdivisions themselves. Incidentally, with the abandoned ammunition, one could have armed several divisions. Today, 2 Vidino regiments of the militia of special designation arrived and patrol post services, which were formed from among the local residents. You have decided to not fight, but maintain order on the side of the Russian federal forces. What prompted this decision? In my opinion, we're fulfilling our duty in maintaining social order and fighting organized crime. Since blood is flowing, it must be stopped as soon as possible. This is one of the field commanders who fought near the village of Bamut. Today, he, together with his regiment, around 400 men, voluntarily laid down their weapons and surrendered to the federal forces. The tension is escalating on the border of Dagestan and Chechnya. A tragic incident occurred near the suburbs of the Dagestani village Shushia. According to Itar TASS, there, as a result of a provocational sally by Chechen gunmen and crossfire with troops, 4 innocent residents died from wounds sustained during firing. Among the victims, there are basically women and children. The gunmen of the Tajik opposition 2 times during the last night shot at one of the outposts of the Moscow Border Regiment. These nocturnal shooting bouts are evidence that the inter-Tajik agreement on a temporary ceasefire extended recently until the 26th of August is not being complied with by the Tajik opposition. After the lull on the border, which is connected with the inter-Tajik talks underway in Almaty, the situation here in the last days has a tendency toward escalation. Since the 2nd of June, the final day of the 4th round of talks, provocations follow in a string. Most alarming are the Moscow and Kalahuimsk directions. Here's the chronicle of these days. On the 3rd of June, an armed insurgents on the compound of the first outpost of Kharok was prevented. On the same day, pounded with mortar was the Turk border post. On the same day, at the 8th outpost of the Pianchsk border regiment, shot in the back and killed was the private Sergei Bobnichenko. The 4th of June, intelligence informed of movement of groups of gunmen on Afghan territory near Kalayhumba. On the 5th of June, subjected to mortar fire from the rear was the border post Navranga of the Moscow regiment. And from this morning, fired at again from the rear was the 12th border outpost of the Moscow border regiment. The command of the group of the Russian border troops in Tajikistan expresses concern over the increasing frequency of attacks and firing on border outposts from the territory of Tajikistan. Russian and Ukrainian experts continue to prepare documents for the Sochi meeting between the Presidents Yeltsin and Kuchma on the problems of the Black Sea Fleet. Over the course of 3 years, this problem remains unresolved, causing complications not just in the mutual relations of the 2 countries, but the fates of individual people. The Sevastopol residents are experiencing special interest in the forthcoming meeting of the Presidents of Russia and Ukraine because the city is at the merging point of the strategic interests of both countries. Administratively, it's subordinate to Kiev, but all its routes are connected to Russia. Coming as recruits to the Black Sea Fleet are only Russian fellows, and after Russia conveyed to Ukraine its military naval bases in Achakov, Odessa, and Izmail, its nucleus has come to be in Sevastopol. There's nothing left to give away, but in Sevastopol, the military naval forces of Ukraine are based. From the imminent meeting of the 2 presidents, not just I, but all Sevastopolians await only one thing: to resolve this matter. The Sochi meeting is anticipated in Russia and in Ukraine, but it's completely possible that it won't resolve practical issues of the fate of the Black Sea Fleet, feels the press secretary of the Russian President Sergei Medvedev. And yet, to belittle the significance of the forthcoming meeting, there's no basis. According to Sergei Medvedev, it will be of a business nature and may become a prime step toward the meeting of Boris Yeltsin and Leonid Kuchma in Kiev. The press secretary of the president clarified today the fate of the resignation report of General Lebed. Sergei Konstantinovich, tell us, is it true that the letter of the commander of the army of the 14th Army, General Lebedь, to the president didn't end up in Boris Nikolaevich's hands? I can say with all confidence that the letter is in the hands of Boris Nikolaevich. It was personally delivered by the first aide of Viktor Ilyushin to the president. But the fact that it was not recorded in the office of the president, as I said yesterday, so it is. That letter was not recorded. But Boris Nikolaevich attentively reviewed this document and has already issued instructions to Oleg Lobov, Pavel Grachov, Andrei Kozyrev to clarify the matter, how General Lebedь carried out the instructions of the president when the general was appointed to the post of commander of the 14th Army. His mission was as follows: to create order in the 14th Army, to strengthen discipline, and the main thing was to establish strict control over the armaments. At the same time, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Secretary of the Security Council were assigned the task of preparing a proposal concerning the report of General Lebedь about his resignation. Alexander Lebedь himself for now refuses to comment on reports that the president did not sign his resignation report. According to TASS, in the units of the 14th Army today, a scheduled combat preparation was underway, and the commander of the army himself was practicing parachuting today with one of his units. The Minister of Defense of Russia, Pavel Grachov, today observed flights on the flight test base in Zhukovsky. There he was demonstrated, apart from other things, the multifunctional destroyer of the 21st century. Lately, the Minister of Defense has become a frequent guest of the military pilots. Unconditionally, Russian aviation is the pride of the armed forces of the country. Therefore, Pavel Grachov recently demonstrated its capabilities near Mount Elbrus to military attachés from 42 countries of the world, and today in Zhukovsky to domestic journalists. However, the first part of the program, when the crews of the MiG-29s performed miracles in the skies, were not inspiring to the press. First of all of this is old hat, and secondly, later it was promised that journalists would be shown the multifunctional destroyer of the 21st century, the MiG-25. But after the Minister of Defense entered the hangar containing the top-secret craft, the gates were tightly shut before the press. The bewilderment of the press representatives knew no limits. It was forbidden to film or even approach the modification of the MiG-29. And leaving the hangar, Grachov said a few phrases about the power of Russian aviation and switched over to international topics. For example, information about the fact that Russia in the near future is prepared to withdraw its peacekeeping forces from Yugoslavia. He called another canar, or a false report, and added, on those sites where our peacekeepers are performing their service, in principle, order is being maintained, and there is not such active combat. The most interesting fact is that the multifunctional destroyer is already known abroad, and yet Russian journalists weren't given elementary flight characteristics. According to certain specialists, at the flight testing and modification base in the name of Mikoyan, the new craft will be equipped with a powerful anti-radar defense system. For journalists today, it became an invisible shadow. The only comfort is that in our homeland, still unique military technologies are created, and of course they must be protected as the apple of one's eye. But the question is, from whom? Today, President Yeltsin held several meetings in the Kremlin. First of all, with the chairman of the Federative Council, Vladimir Shumeyka, and then later with the chairman of the State Duma, Ivan Rybkin. They discussed the problems of current legislation and, first of all, the perspectives of adopting a law on the elections of the deputies for the State Duma and the law on the formation of the Federative Council. They examined versions of compromises which would permit to expedite the adoption of these prime laws. Boris Yeltsin received today the General Director of TASS, the Vice Premier Vitaly Ignatyenko, as well. With him, he discussed matters of information policy. The President noted that the press has been working more professionally and independently, but it still needs active government support. They also discussed problems of social security for journalists. One concrete decision regarding mass media the President did adopt today. He declined the law on a special manner of privatization of television and radio broadcasting adopted previously by the State Duma and ratified by the Federative Council. In a letter sent in that connection to the chairman of the State Duma, Ivan Rybkin, it's indicated that an entire series of tenets of the given law contradict the Constitution and the laws of the Russian Federation. Viktor Chernomyrdin does not intend to submit his candidacy for presidential elections in 1996. He stated this today in Krasnodar, where, upon interrupting his vacation in Sochi, he arrived to participate in the founding conference of the Время organization. Our home is Russia. The discussion at the founding conference concerned more concrete matters: prices on bread and building of ports and problems of post-secondary education and support for the agricultural industry. Incidentally, the Prime Minister assured agrarians that by the current harvest they would be supplied with all the necessities. Responding to the journalists' questions, Viktor Chernomyrdin assured that the worst times in the economy have passed. We will be judged by our deeds. We're visible. And I can say again that we are responsible. We are the leaders. What is a chairman of the government? How can I be divided where I'm in a movement or part of me is a chairman of government? And how can one make that mistake? There can be no mistake. There are things, of course, to criticize me for and us for, but we're doing things and want to accomplish and do. And already we know how to do much. Today, Viktor Chernomyrdin met with the Cossacks of the Pan-Kuban Cossack Army, the largest Cossack organization in the Krasnodar Rim area. The Prime Minister of the Russian government reminded that he himself is of Cossack origin and stated that there is already and soon to take effect is an entire package of laws governing the Cossacks, which in the opinion of Viktor Chernomyrdin were always the stronghold of Russian statehood. The first Vice Premier, Anatoly Chubaiets, today spent the day in Krasnoyarsk, where he participated in the Council of the Siberian Agreement, an organization which unites the largest regions in the east of the country. The heads of the republics, rims and districts of the Siberian region had a glance into the future. In Krasnoyarsk, they discussed basic directions for budget policy for the coming year. The work on the budget is not yet completed. However, already a political presentation of drafts has occurred, which after discussion in regions presumably will undergo amendments and addenda. In 5 months, the first Vice Premier Anatoly Chubaiets noted, in the economy signs of recovery have been noted, and this concerns mostly industry. Decline is slowed down, and by a year end it will be stopped altogether. Today, a minute symbolic growth of 1% was noted, but it's valuable, said Anatoly Chubaiets, because it indicates that the correct path has been chosen. Another important indicator was the stabilization and strengthening of the ruble. That's the basis on which the budget for next year will be built. The most important thing in the budget for 96 is to stop the growth of prices and begin the increase in manufacturing. Essentially, now in 1995, along these two directions, we can see obvious results. The government intends to resolve several social objectives. Additional funds are allotted to support science and education. It's planned to increase salaries. At the same time, Anatoly Chubaiets warned against premature steps in indexation of pensions by 25% on the 1st of July. Such a law is ripening in Parliament. This is an important social measure, but it's only feasible in 3 months. From the acute problems of the short term, unemployment was singled out. Recently in the government, we analyzed a situation with the financial resources, specifically resources of the Employment Fund, and became convinced that there are gigantic financial resources in the area, major financial resources, which may be used completely to protect people. Commenting on this situation on the currency market, Anatoly Chubaiets expressed confidence for the continued process of stabilization of the ruble. Certain financiers are signing transactions for September and October at the value of 6,000 rubles per dollar, but these people are to be pitied, said the first Vice Premier. They could suffer large-scale financial losses. Today, the Vice Premier had every basis to speak of that confidently. The rate of the ruble against the dollar and trading in Moscow remained at the previous level. Today, the dollar costs 4,009 rubles. But Russian history of the American dollar began much earlier than the current heightened interest in the correlation of the national currencies. The newspaper Arguments and Facts reported that the dollars in their current form were designed and drawn by the Russian émigré artist Sergei Makhranovsky in the 1920s. In industrially developed countries, technical measures for rehabilitation of the handicapped comprise 400 brands. In Russia, not more than 200. These figures were quoted today at the Government Commission on Operative Matters. The Minister of Social Security, Lyudmila Bezlepkina. Traditionally, she added, all this equipment was produced in the cottage industry. However, during the times of reform, the invalids were lucky at least in something. The defense sector applied all of its science-technical potential to manufacture these complicated items. But the absence of financing threatens to destroy the newly formed cooperation. NPO Energy, which united more than 70 organizations, works on credit. Yet, certain goods are already comparable to the best models in the world. Well, it's no surprise the level is of a space missile caliber. With difficulty making ends meet are the manufacturers of the AK automobile. Delays with payments and double additional price over cost levied make it unlucrative to produce. The government managed to disperse to the Ministry of Social Security from the promised 19 billion rubles only 1 billion. Therefore, hundreds of thousands of chronically ill submissively await their chance to live. The results of the discussion were summarized by Lex Saskavets. He instructed by year-end to set up production of 30,000 AK vehicles and in the draft resolution replace only one phrase, to review the possibility to allotting the necessary funds. If this is government policy, he continued, we must follow it without deviation. From the Judicial Chronicle, again because of the respondent's failure to attend in court, the lawsuit of the chairman of the Federal Security Service of Russia, Sergei Stepashin, was not heard against the deputy of the Duma, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who called Stepashin at one of the sessions of the Duma an agent of two foreign intelligence agencies. So in front of the building of the Preobrazhensk Municipal Court of Moscow, there was not the usual support group for the deputy Zhirinovsky with traditional placards. It was clear that the respondent nor his representative would show up in court. Attending now the fifth fruitless session, the attorney of Sergei Stepashin told of all failed attempts to serve a subpoena to Mr. Zhirinovsky. In this very court, which is only a few blocks away from his home, he can't show up for more than half a year. He makes trips to the south, other trips to the north, and somewhere he dirties his boots so that later he can wash them off in the Indian Ocean. But to find time to travel a few blocks from his home to court and respond to the court, he can't do that. I think that this is evidence, furthermore, that Zhirinovsky, despite his masculine form, now in Lieutenant Colonel epaulets, apart from that, he's also a coward, as insulting as it should sound for a deputy of the State Duma, because saying certain words in the Duma, he's afraid to answer for them before the court. According to Yuri Kostanov, if Stepashin wins the case, the 100 million rubles received by suing Deputy Zhirinovsky he'll give to the family of one of the employees of the Federal Security Service who died. The next hearing is scheduled for the 12th of September. The Special Operative Investigative Brigade has been formed to search for a particularly dangerous criminal who escaped yesterday from solitary confinement. Today it was precisely established that Alexander Salonik fled through the courtyard of the prison with the use of alpine cords. On his record, there are several flights from other prisons and even from the court hall. According to Itartast, organized crime has offered $500,000 to free the famous assassin who even at one time attempted to undergo plastic surgery to change his appearance. A measure which is broadly used in the criminal world pervasively. The German terrorist number one, the 47-year-old Johannes Weinrich, arrested in Yemen, extradited to the FRG and currently is in the Berlin prison Mobile. This news could not but become a sensation in a country where, for 20 years, special services have hunted for the invisible assassin. International terrorist, who 3 times underwent facial plastic surgery and 2 times changed the skin on his fingers, comfortably commands 5 languages, which helped him freely to move throughout the world with 10 authentic passports, remaining invincible against Interpol, BND, and the FBI. The only one who knew the last face of Weinrich was another international criminal, Carlos, arrested last summer in Munich airport with the infamous nuclear suitcase. He evidently directed the police on his colleague's track. The record of Weinrich's black deeds is impressive. 1975, the murder in Paris of a retired judge with a grenade launcher. Then he placed a bomb in the Arles airport. In 1981, he placed a splintering mine in the headquarters of the radio station Free Europe in Munich. 36 people were seriously wounded and crippled. In 1983, an assassination attempt on the Saudi Arabian ambassador in Athens. In the same year, he blew up the French Cultural Center, the Maison de France in Berlin. As a result, one person died and 27 were injured. Later, Weirich's track was lost somewhere in the Middle East. They presume that after his activities, the fugitive with the multi-million honorariums decided to rest in preferred consultations with old sheiks rather than security. Along the hot track, Berlin prosecutor publicized one more sensation. In the archives of the Special Service of the former GDR Stasi, Johannes Weinrich is recorded as man number 2 in the faction of Red Brigades, an organization of international revolutionaries. There's also information that in the end of the 1970s, he underwent terrorist training at one of the military camps in Hungary and later retreated to Budapest to rest from his high-profile deeds. The leader of the cult, Sinrikyo, Sioko Sahara, who had predicted an imminent end of the earth in the last war between good and evil, was today officially indicted for murder and attempted murder in connection with the gas attack in the Tokyo metro. Simultaneously, the Tokyo prosecutor has indicted 6 of his colleagues with similar indictments. As a maximum punishment, they could face execution through hanging. In the prosecutor's resolution, it's noted that the accused were involved in the clandestine production at one of the sect's facilities of the nerve-paralyzing gas sarin. Russia today received assurances of official London that the current mandate of the UN peacekeepers in Bosnia-Herzegovina will be preserved. This is the first result of the talks in London of Andrei Kozyrev. Details in the report of Alexander Malikov. The current visit of Andrei Kozyrev here in London was awaited probably with particular impatience. The West is intrigued and it wants as quickly as possible to get an indication which string Russia will pull to untie another tight Balkan knot, and mostly the problem of hostages of the UN peacekeeping forces in Bosnia. The impatience was so intense that the Minister of Defense requested to attend the unplanned meeting, Malcolm Rifkind, and the visit was opened by a visit to the Russian embassy. There, a ceremony of exchange of busts was held to two great military leaders. The Russian one, the military man, the Marshal George Zhukov, and the British political one, Winston Churchill. Without Russia, the victory of peace in Europe would have been impossible 50 years ago, noted the grandson of the legendary British leader, Sir Winston Churchill. We'll add that it's impossible without Russia even today in the Balkans, even with all the circumventive maneuvers of the NATO diplomacy. Today, we began specifically with Bosnia, and I received assurances from Douglas Hurd, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Great Britain, that none of these plans exceed the parameters of the current peacekeeping mandate of the UN forces, and all these plans will be implemented in the framework of the existing structure of the command of the forces by the United Nations. And all of these plans are directed not to turn the UN forces into a side in the conflict, but to better protect the peacekeepers themselves. Today in Tel Aviv, the Chancellor of the FRG, Helmut Kohl, held talks with the leadership of Israel. In the center of attention, the peace process in the Middle East and the role of the European Union in achieving the peace in the region. Helmut Kohl also plans to visit the Gaza sector, where he intends, with the leader of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, to discuss problems regarding the development of Israeli-Palestinian dialogues and providing international economic aid to the Palestinian autonomy. Elton John arrived in Moscow on his private plane at 1600 hours. At 1700 hours, he came to the Kremlin Palace, along the walls of which quietly his fans gathered. For 16 years, the Moscow public waited for a meeting with Elton John. Then, in 1979, he was the first popular performer of such a caliber who performed in our country. But then, Elton himself and his fans never presumed that their next meeting would be within the Kremlin walls. In the middle of the 1960s, Reginald Kenneth White, that's the real name of the musician, began in a small cafe. In the beginning of the 1970s, he received his first Grammy. Later, there were many prestigious awards, the collection of which was supplemented this year by the Oscar. A classic in music, Elton John always stood out because of his extravagant, cynical image, audacious headgear, and bizarre frames of eyeglasses, which always shocked the public. The musician explains that as a child, he wasn't always happy, and he's attempting to catch up on all the games he missed out on as a child. In 25 years of work, Elton John experimented reinvented in instrumentation, changed stylistics, and yet unchanged was the manner of performance. His voice is unmistakable, although his compositions are often performed by other famous musicians. In the last 16 years, in Russia, a new generation of Elton fans have grown, and one more is in the wings, the same one that watches the cartoon film Lion King and listens to the marvelous music of Elton John. The commentator Ilya Kukin will acquaint you with the sports news. I bid you farewell and wish you all the best. On Channel 1, the sports news. Good evening. Exactly 2 hours ago, Evgeny Kafelnikov in the quarterfinals in the Open French Championships beat Andrei Agassi. Details in half a minute, but for now, a new world record on the track and field path. This record, which was immediately christened Fantastic, was set at a 10-kilometer distance by the Kenyan runner Haile Gebrselassie. By 8.7 seconds, he improved on the accomplishment of his compatriot William Sigi, which was held for 11 months. And now tennis. 6 years ago, in 1989, Andrei Chesnakov was the last Russian tennis player who managed to enter the semifinals of the French Championships, and now a new success. Today's triumphant one, Evgeny Kafelnikov, cleanly in 3 sets beat the first seed of the world in the tournament. It would seem to be a sensation, but if we look at the history of the personal matches, one may remember that the score until this evening was equal, 1-1, and Kafelnikov beat Agassi last year on a hard court. I didn't feel any pressure and simply played tennis, Kafelnikov commented today. He's in the semifinals. Ahead is a no less frightening rival, the Austrian Thomas Muster. He's unbeaten on paved courts for more than 30 matches straight. And today in the 5-set match he beat the Spaniard Costa. All quarterfinal matches were held for the women today. There were no surprises. The players with the highest ratings won, and maybe the speed is surprising with which Steffi Graf dealt with Gabriela Sabatini. The match lasted 55 minutes. In the semifinals, Sanchez will meet Data and Graf will play Martinez. And next, the soccer chronicle. Simultaneously, 15 qualifying matches in the European tournament will be held tomorrow. The Russians play in San Marino with the hosts, and the greatest intrigue is expected in the match Bulgaria-Germany. The writer Christos Stoichko, whose autobiography came out in his homeland, and his teammates burn with desire to prove that their victory over the Germans last year at the World Championship was not an accident. These two teams are leading in their subgroups. The Bulgarians are first and the German team is second, behind by 1 point. The final match for the Swiss Cup was held. The trophy went to the Sion club. We especially draw attention to this match and why you'll learn in the end of the broadcast. The European inter-season is beginning. The main topic right now is transfers, including trainers. 1 year in Munich was to Jovan Protoponi's detriment, but he's still returning home to Calera. If the great trapper in the Bundesliga was not appreciated, the English Bobby Rowland is respected by Portugal, and they won't let him leave Porto for Arsenal, although there were rumors. The Swedish town Gävle, where recently the World Hockey Championships were held, will again host a World Championship, this time women's soccer. In the first match, the hosts met with the Brazilian team and lost 0-1, losing a goal in the first time. Preparing to defend their title are the world champions, the U.S. team. From the enormous video subject prepared by the television company CNN, we have selected the most beautiful moment.
Until death for the World Championship title, U.S. Park.
And at the home of the world champions in women's soccer, in full swing is the intense battle for the most prestigious hockey and basketball trophies. The best defense of the Stanley Cup, who are they? You're right, you guessed it. It's the New Jersey Devils defense and the goalie Martin Broda. New Jersey has again defeated Philadelphia, this time 5-2, and leads in the series 2-0. And the main secret of the success is that, again, they managed to neutralize the best trio of Philadelphia, headed by Eric Lindros. In the NBA, ahead is the last and decisive battle in the final series for the championship title between Orlando and Houston. The live basketball symbol of the 90s, the Orlando's Shaquille O'Neal, against a no less glamorous rival, the most valuable player and champion of last season, Hakeem Olajuwon. How can one not remember the eternal question, what will win, youth or experience? That was the sports news on Channel 1. And now again about the soccer topic. In rugby, there is a certain term, an attack in a fan formation. When this tactic is used by the players, at times it's very beautiful. All the best. Good evening. Tomorrow, in the Nenetsk Autonomous District, on the majority of the Komi Republic, variably cloudy skies. Precipitation is unlikely, and for now it's cold. At night, down to -5 during the day, +6 to 11. Gradually, the weather will improve in the Volga-Vatsk area, in the Perm District, Udmurtia and Bashkiria. Precipitations will decrease, and the sun will prevail most often during the day, +5 to 10. However, at night, in places there is frost possible. In the central area, in the Hangisk area, under the influence of an anticyclone which has formed in a cold air mass, it will continue to be dry and cool. At night, +3 to 8. In some places around 0 during the day, 15 to 20. In Karelia, on the Kola Peninsula, in the zone of an atmospheric front, some light rain will pass through, +15 to 20. Without significant precipitation in the northwestern area and in the Baltic states, +18 to 23. In Belarus, Ukraine, and in Moldova, in the second half of the day, some brief torrential rains will fall with thunderstorms. During the thunderstorms, winds will increase to 15 to 20 meters per second, day temperatures 20 to 25. In the zone of an atmospheric front in the Rostov district, in Kuban, Stavropol, northern Caucasus areas, brief thunderstorms with some isolated hail and gusty winds during the day, 23 to 28. On the Black Sea resorts and beyond the Caucasus, another atmospheric front will also bring torrential rains and thunderstorms during the day, 24 to 29, temperature of the seawater around 18 degrees. In the central Chernozem area, over the central and lower Volga, in the zone of an anticyclone, the sun will shine brightly, and only in the lower plateaus of the Volga some brief periods of rain are possible. Temperatures of 17 to 22 over the lower Volga, up to +25. In St. Petersburg, variably cloudy skies, no precipitation at night, 9 to 11, during the day 20 to 22 degrees. In Moscow, the exhausting heat will be replaced by the desired cooling period. Tomorrow in the capital, mostly clear, at night 5 to 7. In the east, frost is possible, down to -1. During the day, +18 to 20 degrees. In the next 2 days, the air will gradually warm up to 23 to 25 degrees. That was the weather forecast for the 7th of June. Goodbye.